In the heart of a quiet American town, a pastor was supposed to be a shepherd, a man trusted to guide his congregation through faith and morality. But behind closed doors, he was living a dangerous double life, a secret affair with his own daughter's best friend. What began as whispers and hidden glances spiraled into lies, betrayal, and ultimately, death. By the time the truth came out, 2 innocent women were dead. A family was destroyed, and an entire community was left questioning how well they truly knew the man they had called their leader. This is the chilling story of Pastor Daniel Harper, the man whose secret sins ended in a double murder. Daniel Harper was born in 1972 in a small industrial town outside Columbus, Ohio. The middle of 3 children, Daniel grew up in a house where religion wasn't just a belief, it was the law of the land. His father, Charles Harper, worked long hours at the steel mill, but on Sundays he transformed into a stern patriarch, leading the family through thick black Bibles with cracked leather covers. His voice carried like thunder when he quoted scripture, and to young Daniel, it seemed like his father spoke with the authority of God himself. Daniel's mother, Ruth, was gentle, quiet, and submissive, often retreating into the kitchen rather than challenge her husband. Daniel watched this dynamic closely. The father who commanded obedience, the mother who endured in silence. From a young age, he learned that power and respect came not from kindness, but from presence and performance. At school, Daniel was a different boy. Teachers called him bright, articulate, persuasive. He had a natural ability to command a room, to make classmates laugh, to turn even punishment into a show. Once, after being caught cheating on a spelling test, Daniel cried and quoted a Bible verse about forgiveness. The teacher not only let him off lightly, but praised his maturity. That moment stuck with him. He realized that charisma could be a shield that people wanted to believe in him, and he could use that to his advantage. By high school, Daniel was leading prayers at youth group, organizing charity drives, and standing at pulpits long before he was old enough to shave. People whispered that he had the voice of a preacher and the destiny of a leader. Daniel believed them. But behind that budding faith leader was something darker. Friends noticed he could be manipulative, charming one moment, cutting the next. If he didn't get his way, he sulked or lashed out. He was addicted to approval, desperate for admiration. By the time he left for seminary, Daniel wasn't just chasing God, he was chasing a spotlight. At seminary, Daniel was surrounded by other young men eager to serve God, but he stood out. His booming voice, quick wit, and polished sermons made him a favorite of professors and peers alike. It was there he met Rebecca Turner. Rebecca was the daughter of a farmer from northern Indiana. Her upbringing had been humble. Fields of corn and soy, evenings around a dinner table where grace was always said before the meal. Unlike Daniel, Rebecca didn't crave attention. She found joy in quiet acts of service, baking for neighbors, visiting the elderly, tutoring children at her church. Rebecca was captivated by Daniel's passion. Where she was gentle, he was fiery. Where she was cautious, he was bold. He made her feel chosen, as though her faith and devotion had finally been rewarded. Within 2 years, they were married in a modest ceremony, surrounded by family and classmates. From the outside, they were the perfect match. Congregants admired Rebecca's kindness and Daniel's charisma. Together, they seemed destined to build a thriving ministry. But early cracks appeared. Daniel, ever ambitious, pushed for bigger stages, larger audiences. Rebecca wanted simplicity, family dinners, a steady home, the slow rhythm of small-town life. She deferred to Daniel, believing that supporting his calling was her purpose. Their marriage became a performance, Rebecca playing the role of devoted wife, Daniel playing the role of devoted husband. But beneath the performance, Daniel's hunger for validation only grew. After several small pastoral positions, Daniel and Rebecca moved to Fairhaven, a picturesque town of just under 10,000 residents. Nestled among rolling hills and farmland, Fairhaven was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked, neighbors shared casseroles, and everyone knew when someone was sick, grieving, or celebrating. At the town's heart stood Grace Fellowship Church, white clapboard siding, a tall steeple piercing the sky, and stained glass windows that bathed the pews in warm colors. For decades, Grace Fellowship had been a modest but steady congregation, averaging 50 worshipers on a Sunday. That changed when Daniel Harper took the pulpit. His sermons weren't dry recitations of scripture. They were stories filled with laughter, tears, and relatable lessons. He told tales of his childhood struggles, peppered with humor, always circling back to God's redemptive grace. Congregants felt seen, understood, inspired. Within months, attendance doubled. Within a year, they were outgrowing the sanctuary. Daniel visited the sick, baptized newborns, and became a fixture at town events. He cut ribbons at charity drives, blessed football games, and prayed at city council meetings. To Fairhaven, he wasn't just a pastor. He was a leader, a counselor, a beacon of stability. But as Daniel's influence grew, so did his ego. He reveled in the applause after sermons, the grateful handshakes, the admiration whispered behind his back. To him, the town wasn't just a flock. It was an audience. Emily Harper, Daniel and Rebecca's eldest daughter, was 15 when she introduced her new best friend, Samantha Cooper. Samantha was 16, tall, bright-eyed, with an infectious laugh that drew people in. She came from a fractured home. Her father had walked out when she was young, and her mother, a nurse, worked grueling double shifts to keep food on the table. Samantha often came home to an empty house, microwave dinners, and long evenings alone. At the Harper household, she found what she had always craved: warmth, structure, and belonging. Movie nights on the couch, family dinners where grace was said before eating, laughter echoing through the kitchen. Rebecca welcomed her with open arms, setting a plate for her without hesitation. Emily adored having her best friend practically live at the house. And Daniel, at first he seemed like a protective father figure. He teased her about schoolwork, encouraged her ambitions, and occasionally offered advice about faith and relationships. To Samantha, he was the kind of father she had never known: attentive, affirming, present. But over time, something shifted. Daniel began complimenting her appearance more often, lingering in conversation, finding excuses to be near her. What began as paternal interest started to carry a weight Samantha couldn't quite name. Rebecca noticed none of it. To her, Samantha was like a second daughter. To Daniel, she was something far more dangerous. Until, at first, Daniel's attention towards Samantha could be dismissed as kindness. He'd ask about her grades, her part-time job at the diner, her dreams of studying journalism. He praised her for being mature beyond her years. But slowly, subtle lines began to blur. When Samantha laughed at one of his jokes, Daniel held her gaze just a beat too long. When she left the room, he sometimes followed with an excuse to grab a glass of water, to check on the TV, to pass by coincidentally. It started small, a hand on her shoulder that lingered, a comment about how she had really grown up this year, a whispered assurance that she was special. Samantha, like many teenage girls seeking validation, glowed under the attention. Her own father had been absent, distant, uninterested in her life. Daniel's attentiveness felt like sunlight after a long winter. She began to confide in him more than her own mother. But with each conversation, Daniel was grooming her. He framed his interest as spiritual guidance, weaving scripture into compliments. God has given you such beauty, inside and out. You're wise beyond your years. That's a gift. I see something in you, Samantha, something extraordinary. Soon, what looked like mentorship evolved into secrecy. Late-night texts under the guise of checking in. Car rides home where conversations drifted into the personal, the forbidden. To Samantha, it was confusing: part father figure, part mentor, part something else. She knew it was wrong, but she also knew it made her feel chosen. Daniel had crossed the line, and now there was no going back. Rebecca began noticing changes in Daniel long before she could name them. He came home later from church meetings. He seemed more distracted, short-tempered, impatient. Family dinners that once filled the kitchen with laughter now fell silent as Daniel scrolled on his phone under the table or disappeared into his office to finish a sermon. When Rebecca asked what was wrong, he snapped, "Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? This church runs because of me. People depend on me." She tried to be understanding. Pastors carried burdens most couldn't imagine. But deep down, Rebecca sensed something different, something heavier, more corrosive. Their intimacy faded. She found him distant in bed, uninterested in her touch. He began critiquing her appearance, comparing her subtly at first to younger women in the congregation who still had their spark. Rebecca turned to her prayer journal. Page after page, she poured her heart out. Lord, I feel him slipping away. I don't know how to reach him anymore. Help me be the wife he needs. Help me hold this family together. But Rebecca was fighting for a man who was already giving himself away. By Samantha's junior year of high school, Daniel's obsession was undeniable. What had begun as subtle gestures escalated into full-blown secrecy. He arranged study sessions at the church office when no one else was around. He sent late-night texts that blurred into flirtation. Then one summer evening, as Samantha helped clean up after a youth group barbecue, Daniel cornered her in the church kitchen. He told her she was beautiful. He told her he felt things for her he couldn't explain. He told her she was a blessing sent by God. Samantha froze. She knew it was wrong, yet she also felt powerless. When Daniel kissed her, she didn't resist. She didn't know how. From that moment, their affair began. Secret meetings at motels 2 towns over, coded text messages that looked like Bible verses but carried hidden meaning, whispered conversations in the Harper household when Rebecca and Emily were in the next room. For Samantha, it was intoxicating and terrifying. She was in love, or at least what she thought was love, but every time she looked at Rebecca, who treated her like a daughter, guilt gnawed at her. For Daniel, it was adrenaline. The risk, the secrecy, the thrill of being wanted by someone young and impressionable. His sermons grew more passionate, his energy more magnetic. The congregation thought he was on fire for God. In truth, he was on fire for Samantha. But secrets this toxic don't stay hidden forever. By late 2017, Rebecca could no longer ignore the signs. She found receipts for gas stations in towns Daniel had no reason to visit. She noticed Samantha pulling away, avoiding eye contact, her once frequent visits suddenly less regular. One night, while folding laundry, Rebecca discovered a text on Daniel's phone, a half-deleted message, part Bible verse, part something more intimate. Her heart sank. She didn't need proof beyond that. She knew. That evening, Rebecca confronted him. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's Samantha, isn't it?" For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he lashed out. He accused her of paranoia, of trying to tear him down, of not being supportive enough. Rebecca sobbed, begging him to come clean, to repent, to stop whatever was happening. But Daniel saw only one solution: remove the obstacle. The next day, Rebecca was found collapsed in the kitchen, a half-empty mug of tea on the counter beside her. Daniel called 911, his voice frantic, claiming his wife had fainted. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead shortly after. Daniel told everyone it was a heart attack. The church mourned, the town grieved. But something about it felt wrong. Too sudden, too convenient. And when the toxicology report came back weeks later, the truth began to unravel. Rebecca hadn't died of natural causes. She had been poisoned. Rebecca Harper's funeral was the largest Grace Fellowship Church had ever hosted. The sanctuary overflowed with mourners, members of the congregation, neighbors from across Fairhaven, even pastors from nearby towns who had come to pay their respects. The air smelled of lilies and candle wax. The choir sang softly, and the congregation wept as Daniel, dressed in black, stood before the pulpit. His sermon was flawless. He spoke of Rebecca's devotion, her kindness, her unshakable faith. He painted her as a woman of virtue, a saint who had given her life to her family and her church. His voice cracked at all the right moments, his hands trembling as though he were overcome with grief. People in the pews dabbed at their eyes. Women clutched tissues. Men bowed their heads in silence. But there was one person who could not join in the illusion. Samantha sat near the back, her hands twisting in her lap, her heart pounding so loudly she thought others might hear it. Each time Daniel spoke, she remembered the touch of his hand, the whispered words of affection, the betrayal of the woman whose body now lay in a coffin at the front of the church. Rebecca had treated her like a daughter, and now Samantha knew, even if she didn't want to admit it, that Rebecca's death wasn't natural. Every hymn, every prayer felt like a dagger in her chest. By the time the service ended, Samantha fled, unable to breathe beneath the weight of her guilt. To the rest of the town, Daniel was a grieving husband. To Samantha, he was a man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In the weeks following Rebecca's funeral, Samantha unraveled. She stopped showing up at the Harper house. She ignored Emily's texts, made excuses when invited over, and spent long hours locked in her bedroom staring at the ceiling. Her schoolwork slipped. She quit her part-time job at the diner. Friends noticed she had become withdrawn, distracted, haunted. At night, Samantha replayed everything in her mind. The first kiss in the church kitchen, the whispered promises in Daniel's car, the way Rebecca had looked at her with such trust, never knowing what was happening behind her back. And then the day Rebecca died. Samantha remembered Daniel's text from the night before. "Everything will be okay soon. Trust me." At the time, she had thought he meant their relationship. Now she realized it was something else entirely. She couldn't shake the suspicion. Daniel had killed his wife for her. The guilt was unbearable. She had wanted love, validation, belonging. Instead, she felt complicit in something monstrous. Her grades plummeted. Her mother grew concerned but couldn't get her to talk. Emily, confused and hurt by her friend's sudden coldness, tried reaching out, only to be ignored. Samantha was trapped in silence, torn between fear of Daniel's power and shame at her own choices. But guilt like that doesn't stay buried forever. For a while, Daniel seemed untouchable. He preached with more fire than ever, his sermons drawing record attendance. His image as a grieving husband only fueled the congregation's sympathy. Women baked him casseroles. Men shook his hand with admiration. Teenagers looked up to him as a mentor. But behind closed doors, Daniel was unraveling. He began drinking more whiskey hidden in his desk drawer, sipped late into the night. His temper flared at staff meetings. He snapped at Emily over trivial things. He grew paranoid, convinced people were whispering about him. His relationship with Samantha also changed. What once felt thrilling now turned strained. She avoided him, stopped responding to his texts, and when they did meet, she was cold, distant, terrified. Daniel didn't take rejection well. He grew desperate, pressuring her, guilt-tripping her. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, Rebecca is gone. It's just us now. You owe me." Samantha recoiled, but Daniel refused to let her go. Meanwhile, subtle cracks appeared in his carefully constructed persona. A few congregants whispered about how quickly he seemed to bounce back from Rebecca's death. Others wondered about his increasingly erratic moods. Fairhaven was a town built on trust, and once trust begins to fracture, suspicion spreads quickly. 2 months after Rebecca's death, the toxicology report came back. The coroner found traces of a rare compound in her bloodstream, not something that would appear naturally, not something prescribed. It was the kind of chemical you'd find in certain rodent poisons. The findings were flagged, and quietly the police opened a case. At first, they approached delicately. The death of a pastor's wife in a small town was sensitive. The community adored Daniel. Any hint of scandal would ripple through Fairhaven like an earthquake. Detectives began interviewing family and friends. They asked about Rebecca's health, her marriage, her final days. Most people spoke of her as healthy, active, cheerful, not the type to collapse suddenly. A few mentioned she had seemed troubled in the weeks before her death, writing in her prayer journal more than usual. When they asked Daniel about his wife, he performed the role flawlessly. He cried, spoke of their love, described her as his rock. But detectives noticed something odd. His answers were rehearsed, too polished, like a sermon. Then came Samantha. When police questioned her, her hands trembled. Her story was halting, inconsistent. She avoided eye contact. Something about her demeanor suggested she was hiding more than she was saying. The detectives didn't have enough to accuse Daniel outright, but they knew this wasn't a natural death. They suspected foul play, and they suspected the pastor. By the beginning of 2018, Daniel and Samantha's relationship was in freefall, and what had once been thrilling for Samantha had curdled into dread. She avoided his phone calls, deleted his texts, and begged off excuses whenever he pressed her to meet. The guilt weighed heavier than the excitement ever had, but Daniel wasn't ready to let go. Late one night, Samantha received a message from him. "We are destined, you and I. Don't turn your back on me now." She ignored it. Minutes later, another buzz. "You know too much. Be careful what you say." It was no longer love. It was control. Samantha began having nightmares. She dreamed of Rebecca, pale and accusing, standing at the foot of her bed. She dreamed of drinking poisoned tea, her throat burning as Daniel stood over her. She dreamed of funerals where no one cried for her. At school, her friends noticed her trembling hands, her hollow eyes. Teachers pulled her aside, but she brushed them off. Her mother grew worried, but Samantha couldn't bring herself to confess. The walls were closing in. The secret she carried was eating her alive. And Daniel? He grew more desperate by the day. The breaking point came in March. Detectives had returned to question Samantha again, pressing her on Rebecca's final days. The young woman fidgeted, stammered, and finally said, "I don't know anything. Please stop asking." But when they left, she collapsed in tears. That evening, she showed up at Daniel's office unannounced. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. "I can't do this anymore," she told him. "I can't live like this. Everyone is asking questions, and I can't lie forever." Daniel's face darkened. He rose from his chair, slamming his fist against the desk. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? Do you understand what this will do to me? To the church? To us?" "There is no us," Samantha whispered. "Not anymore." For the first time, she saw the mask slip. Daniel wasn't the grieving husband, the charming pastor, the man who had once made her feel special. He was something else entirely desperate, dangerous, cornered. She left his office shaken. For the next week, she avoided him completely, refusing calls, ignoring knocks at her door. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man to accept rejection. In his mind, Samantha wasn't just a girl anymore. She was the one person who could destroy him. And that made her dangerous. April 3rd, 2018. The night Fairhaven would never forget. Samantha's mother was working late at the hospital. Emily had invited Samantha over for a sleepover, hoping to reconnect after months of distance. For the first time in weeks, Samantha allowed herself to relax. They watched movies, ate popcorn, and tried to laugh like they used to. But Daniel knew Samantha was there. He had watched her avoid him for too long. He had seen the detectives circling closer. In his mind, the choice was clear. Silence her before she silenced him. Around midnight, while the girls slept, Daniel slipped into the house. He had a key Rebecca had trusted him with 1 year before. What happened next could only be pieced together by investigators later. A struggle, a scream muffled into silence. Emily, startled awake, stumbling into the hallway only to come face to face with her father. By the time the night was over, both Samantha and Emily were dead. Their bodies discovered hours later by Samantha's mother, who returned home to a nightmare. Fairhaven would never be the same. News spread fast in a small town. By dawn, word was out. Pastor Daniel Harper's daughter and her best friend had been found murdered. Within hours, the church was flooded with mourners, candles lit, prayers whispered, hands clasped in disbelief. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing? Daniel stood at the center of it all, playing the role he knew best. He wept in front of the cameras, hugged grieving congregants, preached about the evil that walks among us. For many, it was convincing. They saw a father broken by tragedy, a shepherd grieving his lost lamb. But for others, those who had watched his behavior shift, who had whispered about Rebecca's sudden death, who had noticed Samantha's haunted eyes, the pieces began to click into place. Detectives, too, were no longer fooled. They had already suspected him of foul play in Rebecca's death. Now, with 2 more bodies tied directly to his household, their focus sharpened like a blade. The town of Fairhaven was in mourning, but beneath the grief lay something else: suspicion. The walls Daniel had built around himself were beginning to crack. Detectives were no longer circling, they were closing in. Rebecca's toxicology results had already raised red flags. Now, with the deaths of Samantha and Emily, investigators were determined to dig deeper. They worked around the clock, pulling phone records, bank statements, and church logs. Daniel's phone showed a flurry of late-night messages to Samantha, including the ominous text just weeks before her death. Several deleted messages were recovered, thanks to forensic software, revealing a disturbing trail of obsession. "We're meant to be together. Don't betray me. I did this for us." Detectives interviewed Samantha's classmates, who reluctantly admitted they had noticed her closeness with Pastor Harper, too close for comfort. A teacher recalled seeing them sitting together in a parked car one evening outside the school. Then came the financial records. Purchases of unusual cleaning supplies. A receipt for a chemical compound matching the one found in Rebecca's system. Daniel had paid cash, but security cameras captured his unmistakable frame. And there was the key, the one Daniel had used to enter Samantha's home undetected. Investigators found it in his desk drawer during a quiet search of the church office. Piece by piece, the image of the beloved pastor crumbled. Forensic analysts built a timeline. Prosecutors prepared an arrest warrant, and detectives whispered among themselves, the wolf had been hiding in the shepherd's clothing all along. April 20th, 2018. The morning sun was just rising when officers pulled into the church parking lot. Daniel had just finished recording a sermon for the church's radio broadcast. He emerged from his office smiling, carrying a Bible under his arm. That smile vanished when he saw the squad cars. "Daniel Harper," the lead detective announced, stepping forward, "you are under arrest for the murders of Rebecca Harper, Samantha Ellis, and Emily Harper." The congregation gasped as word spread. Parishioners who had arrived early for morning prayers froze in shock as their pastor was handcuffed on the church steps. Daniel protested, his voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a mistake. You're destroying an innocent man. God knows the truth." But the evidence spoke louder than his pleas. He was led away in front of cameras, his face pale, his once commanding presence reduced to a broken figure in shackles. Fairhaven had believed their pastor to be a man of God. Now they watched him taken away as a suspected murderer. The trial began in early 2019. Reporters filled the benches. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. The story of a pastor, an affair, and a double murder gripped not only Fairhaven, but the entire state. Prosecutors painted a damning picture. They argued that Daniel, obsessed with Samantha, had poisoned his wife to clear the way for their relationship. When Samantha began to pull away, and when detectives grew suspicious, he killed her to silence her. Emily, tragically, had been caught in the crossfire. The jury listened to weeks of testimony. Forensic experts described the poison in Rebecca's system. Phone analysts read aloud Daniel's deleted text to Samantha. A handwriting specialist testified that the suicide note Rebecca supposedly left was a forgery. The most haunting testimony came from Samantha's mother. Through tears, she described finding her daughter and Emily lifeless that night. Her voice cracked as she looked across the courtroom at Daniel, saying, "You were supposed to protect them. You were supposed to protect all of us." The defense fought hard, portraying Daniel as a grieving husband and father unfairly targeted by overzealous police. They claimed Samantha had invented the affair, that the poison results were inconclusive, that there was no direct witness tying Daniel to the murders. But every argument was met with evidence. Every denial clashed against hard proof. The courtroom atmosphere was electric. Some gasped, some wept, some sat stone-faced. The town's faith was divided. Some still clung to Daniel's innocence, while others felt betrayed beyond repair. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. The town of Fairhaven waited in silence, the weight of judgment hanging heavy in the air. Hours passed, then late in the evening, the jurors filed back into the courtroom. Daniel stood, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. For the first time, the mask had slipped. His eyes darted nervously. His jaw clenched. The foreman read the words that sealed his fate. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Harper. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Samantha Ellis. Guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Emily Harper. The courtroom erupted. Some sobbed with relief. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Daniel collapsed into his chair, his face drained of color. The man who had once commanded the pulpit with fiery sermons was now reduced to silence. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. For the families, it was justice but not healing. Nothing could bring Rebecca, Samantha, or Emily back. Nothing could mend the trust shattered in the town of Fairhaven. And for the congregation, it was a reckoning. Their shepherd had been unmasked as a wolf. When the verdict was read, the town of Fairhaven collectively exhaled, but what followed was not relief. It was a silence, a hollowness that stretched over weeks and months. The once thriving town square with its coffee shop and bookstore now carried a different energy. People lowered their voices when Daniel's name was mentioned. Parents looked at their daughters differently, more protectively, as though the shadow of his actions lingered in every corner. The church, once the beating heart of Fairhaven, became a symbol of betrayal. Attendance plummeted. Families who had spent generations in the pews now walked past the steeple without stepping inside. Some whispered about tearing it down altogether. Others believed the building should remain as a reminder of what happens when trust is blind. At the high school, Emily's classmates left flowers at her locker for weeks. Samantha's friends started a scholarship fund in her name, hoping her memory would not be reduced to a headline. But for many in Fairhaven, the tragedy was too personal to memorialize. People avoided eye contact when reporters came calling. No one wanted their grief turned into another soundbite. Fairhaven had always been a town where doors were left unlocked, where children rode bikes at dusk, where everyone trusted the pastor. Now those doors stayed shut. Trust had been shattered, and it would take generations to rebuild. The First Baptist Church of Fairhaven had been Daniel Harper's domain for nearly 2 decades. After his arrest, its decline was swift and brutal. On Sunday mornings, the sanctuary that once rang with hymns now sat nearly empty. The choir disbanded. The organist stopped showing up. Even the stained glass windows seemed dimmer, as if the light itself had abandoned the place. The elders met in hushed tones, debating what to do. Some argued the church should close permanently. Others wanted to cleanse it with new leadership, insisting that faith should not die with one man's sins. But scandals leave scars. Parishioners who once tithed faithfully now questioned where their money had gone. Parents asked how no one had seen the warning signs. Why had no one protected Samantha? Why had no one questioned Rebecca's sudden death sooner? In the end, the church split. Half the congregation drifted to other communities. The rest struggled on, hiring a soft-spoken interim pastor who preached not about judgment, but about survival. Every sermon carried the weight of the past. Every empty pew whispered of betrayal. The church did not just lose its pastor, it lost its soul. For the Ellis family, grief became a daily companion. Samantha's mother left her job at the hospital, unable to pass through the same emergency room doors where she had carried her daughter's body. She spent her days in therapy, her nights clutching Samantha's favorite blanket. Emily's surviving sister carried her pain more quietly. At just 15, she had lost not only her sibling, but her father too, a man she once idolized, now branded a murderer. She stopped attending school for weeks, her classmates unsure what to say. Some pitied her. Others whispered cruelly behind her back. Rebecca's parents, elderly and frail, sat on their porch most evenings, staring into the fading sunset. They never spoke Daniel's name again. In their minds, their daughter had married a monster in disguise. The families tried grief counseling, group sessions, church support networks, but healing was fragmented. Where one found strength, another collapsed. Where one sought forgiveness, another clung to rage. And yet, in small ways, they honored their loved ones. A mural was painted on the side of Fairhaven High. Emily with her sketchbook, Samantha with her violin, Rebecca holding a bouquet of wildflowers. People stopped and touched the wall when they passed, some whispering prayers, some fighting tears. The mural was not just art. It was a reminder that behind the headlines, these were people, not just victims in a crime story. Years later, the case of Pastor Daniel Harper still haunts Fairhaven. True crime documentaries replay the chilling details. Podcasters dissect his sermons, searching for hidden clues in his words. College students write papers about the pastor who betrayed his flock. But for Fairhaven, the legacy is more personal. And the town learned that evil can wear a friendly face, that trust, once broken, can never fully be repaired, that blind faith can be dangerous when it silences doubts. Parents now warn their children differently, not just about strangers, but about those who seem too perfect, too untouchable. Teachers are trained to recognize signs of grooming and exploitation. Police work more closely with schools. The story became not just a tragedy, but a cautionary tale. And for those who lived it, for the mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, classmates and neighbors, it became a wound they carry quietly, like a scar just beneath the skin. Because the truth is, Daniel Harper was not just a man who sinned. He was a man who destroyed the very people who loved him most. And that betrayal will echo in Fairhaven forever.